Let's talk about the frankly enormous demon datasheet drop that we've just had. We've got the rules for all the greater demons, Plaguebearers and Horrors, Bloodcrushers, Screamers and Flamers, and lots more besides. Let's see how the forces of the Empyrean are shaking up in 40k 10th. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking demons, and we've had a massive amount more details as to how these forces are going to be functioning in the new 40k. This video will be a bit of a roundup of all the datasheets that they've been gradually teasing throughout their Kansas City Open Grand tournaments. They've both been doing a couple of demo games, they had the demons on last night, but have also been randomly sharing a whole bunch of datasheets as the games have gone on. Not 100% sure why Games Workshop feels that that's the best way to deliver content, but it does give us a whole load of information, basically having shared us the vast majority of the contents of their launch detachment, 5 of the stratagems and 2 of their enhancements, plus the majority of the important datasheets in the codex as well. Everything from greater demons to the Daemon Prince of Chaos, soul grinders, plaguebearers, flesh hounds, and more. It's really pretty cool to see how these iconic paragons of chaos are going to be treated in the new edition of the game, so let's go through all the core rules and their datasheets. The only main thing that we're missing is points, hopefully they'll follow up in the not too distant future. First up, as previewed on Warhammer Community, is just a quick review of the Chaos Demons detachment rule, Shadow of Chaos and their Demonic Incursion detachment, the Warp Rifts launch detachment. Shadow of Chaos you get in your deployment zone, and you get either in the No Man's Land or your opponent's deployment zone, provided you control at least half of the object part of the phase. That gives you a few benefits. It means that if you pass a battle shock test when you're under half strength, you regenerate a few wounds. Demonic Terror makes the opponent a little bit more likely to fail Battle Shock, and also doubles down causing some direct damage when they do. And the Warp Rifts rule means that you get the classic close range deep strike that demons had in 9th edition. They can drop in within 6 inches if the area is under your Shadow of Chaos. Overall, it seems like a pretty great one if you can keep it consistently on in the midboard. Does mean that you have to be holding half of those objectives, even in the face of your opponents trying to scrape you off them. The deep strike charges might just be a little bit hard, say if in the opponent's turn they manage to kill a bunch of your demons, knock you off one of the midfield objectives, and then the Shadow of Chaos test is basically done before your reinforcements come in and before you get to move, so you might not have those short charges. Still generally seems handy though, something that's likely to hamper the opponent just by doing what you do anyway. Otherwise though, we now have really quite a lot of the stratagems seen. There's going to be around 6 stratagems per detachment in 10th edition, so it seems that we know the vast majority at the very least. First up, we've got one called Denizens of the Warp. This one allows you a 3-inch deep strike close to your enemy. The unit that you've selected can't charge later in the turn, but they could still shoot, say for example if you use this with some flamers. This one's really quite a powerful one that kind of feels like they've nicked from the Genestealer cult, being able to just plonk a unit down pretty much wherever on the board with the opponent having very limited chance to screen you is really big. You might be able to get some key lines of sight, or you might even be able to craftily steal an objective that your opponent has moved to the edge of. This one seems really nice, perhaps another little incentive to keep units in reserve as well as Shadow of Chaos. I think this will definitely get used. Next up we've got one called Demonic Invulnerability. This one's in your opponent's shooting phase, and it selects its targets. One Legion Demonica unit in your army gets to basically reroll their saving throws of 1. Anything that allows you to reroll saving throws is usually quite interesting. I think you typically want to use this on a unit that's got a 4+ invul, as then you're more likely to pass those rerolls. And if you do use it on such, it looks like this one gives you basically a 20% durability increase here. Not too bad if it's on a big unit. Still though, bear in mind those rerolls still have the chance to fail, that's why it's not higher than that, and while 20% extra durability isn't terrible, it's still not absolutely insurmountable either. You're not doubling your unit's toughness or anything. I still think that this one could be useful though for a dug-in unit on an objective that just absolutely has to survive this turn, and if they do it will give you unusually good benefits. Next up for 1 CP we've got Corrupt Real Space. This is the one that was previewed, basically giving you sticky objectives if you held the objective in the command phase, and that area becomes an area of Shadow in the Warp even if you don't hold the entire midboard. I feel like this one's maybe a slightly more of a big brain one. You do have to commit to this early, and you have to commit to it when the benefits aren't necessarily massively obvious, though obviously having more areas in the shadow is going to be very good. Could be nice if you think your opponent's going to be trying to get into that objective. You might be able to bring in your units super close there if they don't actually take it. Or could be nice on a far-flung objective that you think your opponent might shoot you off, but you might not actually be able to reach. I still think though it's maybe going to be a slightly tough sell compared with stratagems that have a more immediate impact. Next up, we've got one called Warp Surge. This one gives you advance and charge provided you're charging within the shadow of the warp. Pretty nice and simple this one, and I feel like the timing of this one's a lot more helpful than the reinforcements. Basically, you could move your units onto the objectives in the movement phase, then in the charge phase, the mid-board should hopefully be shadowed, so you could guarantee that you could use this stratagem and you could advance in safety. Advance and charge is a really nice option to have on a fairly heavy melee army like Demons. I feel like again this one is definitely going to get used. If it's going to be the difference between the Bloodthirster having enough threat range to actually get into an enemy unit or falling short, that is going to be an absolutely massive deal. Finally, for stratagems that we've seen so far, we've got one called Realm of Chaos. This one's one command point, and it's basically a Grey Knight style teleport shenanigan. Looks like when it's Grey Knights versus Demons, it'll be both armies jumping on and off the board like crazy. The way that this one works is that you spend one command point at the end of your opponent's turn. The units do have to be within your Shadow of Chaos, so if your opponent does scrape you off the mid board, that might not be the case, but you can use it on just one Legion Demonica unit that isn't within the Shadow if that makes more sense. Provided the units aren't actually in engagement range of enemy units, then you can basically remove them from the board and they come back via Deep Strike in your own reinforcement step, potentially having a close range Deep Strike if you do have that shadow. Even just by itself, this is a really nice repositioning ability. Get your units into the enemy backfield late in the game perhaps, or just either stay safe or get to a far-flung objective, all sounds good. Plus you'd also even get to miss the battle shock test as well if that's particularly important. Overall this seems pretty great, and I think it does up the value of Shadow in the Warp. Overall feels like a fairly solid set of stratagems I'd think there. Perhaps for the highest value, I feel like Advance and Charge is going to be big. I really like the redeploy one, and the Deep Strike just outside of 3 inches I think is also very tricky and gives your opponent something else big to worry about. Otherwise, before we get into datasheets, we've got 2 enhancements. It looks like the Chaos Demons are deity locked, which means they might potentially be a little bit less flexible than most, but on the other hand, they do go on really big generic characters in the Greater Demons, and the 2 that we've had previewed do look just genuinely directly useful. Amping up your biggest and most threatening models seems great to me. For Khorne, we've got Argath, King of Blades. This one's a boost that you probably want to put on the Bloodthirster. You get just a flat +1 attack and +1 strength, both of those very decent buffs, and it goes up to +2 attacks and +2 strength if you're in the Shadow of Chaos. Really hard to argue with that one. Bloodthirsters do melee. With the Argath upgrade they do melee better. For example, you could go from 7 attacks to 9 attacks for a Bloodthirster with a Great Axe. The other one that's previewed is the Everstave. This is a Tzeentch one that gives you +1 strength and +3 inch range to your attacks. Again, it's got a Shadow of Chaos boost, which means that you get +2 strength and +6 inches to your attacks. Again, more incentive to be pushing out that Shadow of Chaos. It really does seem to be the big theme of the army. We'll get to the Lord of Change datasheet later, but it does have a fairly savage shooting attack that's kind of close range. I think that both of the buffs seem pretty good on him. I feel like perhaps for both of these, maybe the decision is going to be whether or not you actually field the Lord of Change or the Bloodthirster in the first place. It's going to be a bit of a combined proposition between these and the big monster. Definitely nothing to complain about these 2 though. I guess we'll wait and see the others when we have the Nurgle and Slaanesh one. Let's get into those datasheets though, and starting out we have the Pantheon of Chaos, the 4 Greater Demons, plus the previously previewed one for Be'lakor himself. Stats wise, the Great Unclean One's still looking massively durable. 20 wounds down from 22, toughness 12, and a 4+ invul, so it's kind of cool that he gets his invul save in melee as well to a 4+, not just at range. He also has an aura for giving out a 6+ feel no pain to Nurgle forces, all very appropriate for them, and that does mean that he'll partake of that himself as well, only making him harder to remove from the board. For a special rule, he gets a -1 toughness debuff at the end of the movement phase. He throws that out to an enemy unit within 12 inches, so I guess you can see which one would be the most meaningful for that. Sometimes toughness makes a difference in 10th edition, sometimes not. A lot of vehicles have a lot of toughness, and that does mean that it might not make the difference for the wound bracket. Otherwise, his war gear feels fairly similar. If you get slain from the Doomsday Bell, you get to restore a Plaguebearer model nearby, presuming you've got one. And both the Plague Flail and his Vomit seem fairly potent in the shooting phase. The Vomit looks a little bit stronger than it was, with a big d6 +3 attacks auto hitting at strength 5 and AP 2. Overall seems pretty solid, and the Feel No Pain type buff is pretty good for nearby Nurgle. Next up we've got the Lord of Change. Magic Chicken has gone up to toughness 10 and lost a couple of wounds. Losing 2 wounds does seem to be the theme since the last Demon's Codex, it would seem. And also the Tzeentch units have all been consolidated to a 4+ invul save now. They don't have their 3+6+ disparate thing, where they were loads easier to kill in combat than at shooting. I think that's probably good for them overall. It was quite cool that they countered shooting lists quite well, but it also means that they just would get swept by combat lists pretty easily. Ideally you want to be kind of good against all comers, I think. His special rule is giving nearby Tzeentch things a +1 strength. That would mean that Pink Horror's flames would go to strength 5, or Flamer's attacks would go to strength 5 too. It does seem to affect his own attacks as well, so they'd be going to strength 9 and 10 I suppose, and he could make them even better with that Everstave. It's got a little bit of melee, but perhaps the most standout thing is that fairly powerful Bolt of Change. This looks all rather brutal as a Psychic Witchfire. The overcharged version of it gives you 9 shots, hitting on a 2+, strength 9 AP2 and damage D3, so nice and generalist there. That'll go up to strength 10 because of his own buff, maybe strength 12 because of the Everstave, and then each time he fires with it, you basically get to choose whether you ignore cover, have lethal hits, or sustained hits D3. Unless it's wounding on a 5+, sustained hits D3 seems like it's usually going to be the way to go for. That works out to be a 40% damage increase, which is fairly massive. Definitely could lay waste to a small squad of intercessors in a single round of shooting there. Overall, looks pretty scary, definitely brings some quality ranged firepower to the army, and again is still pretty tough. Next up, it does seem that they've managed to keep the Bloodthirster as a pretty decent melee powerhouse. Again, he's lost the 2 wounds, he's gained toughness 11, and is 4+ both in melee and at range. Looks like he's got a 4+ armor save, so if you manage to get cover on him, he will be able to get a 3+ save out of that. It's quite nice that he doesn't have the towering keyword, which means that all of these greater demons can hide behind obscuring ruins now, which they couldn't in the past. His special rule is a +1 to hit buff for nearby Khorne melee. Sadly, this won't affect him himself unless he's taking negative modifiers, but I guess it's a nice to have. I definitely feel like for him personally, the exciting bit is the actual carnage that he can do himself. And again, he still has the option for either the Great Axe of Khorne or a regular axe plus a small shooting attack, either a Blood Flail or a Lash. I think out of the two, I'd probably just go all in on melee and take the Great Axe. It's either got 14 attacks at strength 10 and damage 2, or 7 attacks at strength 16 and damage d6 +2. And I feel like if you're taking him, you almost certainly want Argath, King of Blades. 9 attacks with that Great Axe profile seems great. Should have a very good chance of killing most important things that you throw him against. 25 wounds against a Rhino, and 8 or 9 dead intercessors. Those numbers do include his other very nice special rule called Relentless Carnage. At the end of the fight phase, he casually does a whole load of mortal wounds to the enemy, rolling 8d6, and for each 4+, the enemy takes an extra mortal wound. That is absolutely brutal. Overall, I feel like Bloodthirsters are probably still going to remain a good choice. It's just a remarkably general purpose damage profile that's a threat to just about everything. Next up, for Slaanesh, we've got the Keeper of Secrets. Again, minus 2-inch move and lost 2 wounds. Again, 4+ invul save. Toughness 10 will keep it safe against small arms that were a bit of a threat to it when it was T7. And it does also have -1 to hit as well, so it's not going to be quite as easy as some to gun down over the course of the game. Well, on generic rules as well, all the greater demons have Deep Strike, and they all seem to have got Deadly Demise as well, so they do actually have a chance to blow up now, which I don't think they had in the past. Overall, it looks like the Keeper is going to be a lot better against medium infantry, a whole bunch of attacks at strength 6 or strength 8, and damage 2 or 3. It's got an aura for extra AP for Slaanesh units nearby, and that would also affect the Keeper itself, so they should be AP -3 on the attacks. Looks excellent for clearing out Space Marines. Its Psyche attack is Phantasmagoria. That one gives you 9 attacks on the overcharge mode, hitting at strength 6, AP -2. That one may be best for clearing things like Termagant Hordes maybe. I'd say it's probably worth the overcharge most of the time unless you're low health. Finally, out of the upgrades, the one that impresses me the most is the Shining Aegis. This just casually gives the Keeper a 5+ Feel No Pain ability. This one basically looks like it's auto-include for me unless it's massively more points. That's basically an extra 50% durability on your Keeper. Those 5+ Feel No Pains are really good. Overall, it does look rather nice. I feel like the Keeper of Secrets might struggle to punch up against monsters and vehicles at least a little bit compared with the Bloodthirster, but between -1 to hit and an easy access 5+ Feel No Pain, it looks like it's going to be a bit of a nuisance to remove from the table. Finally, while we're on the really big stuff, here's Be'lakor himself, the undivided Daemon Prince of Chaos. He's toughness 10, has a 4+ invul save, and he does have the stealth keyword, so he's -1 to hit at range. Perhaps his most powerful defensive rule, though, is choosing the option on the Shadow Form table, where units within 6 inches of him can't be shot greater than 18 inches away, and that could really be awesome to basically shield an entire chunk of your demon force from an enemy gun line on turn 1, unless they're brave enough to move up the board and almost certainly venture within charge range. That does seem like an absolute nightmare if you've got a mainly shooting army and you want to try and get to work on killing these tough demons. Otherwise, he brings a 6-inch aura of Shadow of Chaos. That means that he could still do his trick where he puts down some nearby units to deep strike, move him forward, line up a good charge for him, then pop up a bunch of bloodletters or something to get the jump on the enemy. Betraying Shades is a pretty awesome Witchfire as well, strength 6 and AP -3 and 12 shots. That will absolutely rinse through hordes. And he does have a couple of other options on his Shadow form. handing out battle shock tests a little bit better by making enemy units that have taken any damage have to take one, and also re-rolling battle shock and leadership for your own army if you prefer to have immunity to that. I definitely think his first ability with the shooting thing though is the most powerful if it's relevant. Finally, his melee doesn't ignore invuls now, though that's kind of the case for most things in 40k beyond mortal wounds. It's still very punchy and should be a big threat to anything that he engages. Overall, Bellicor still seems absolutely monstrous to me. I think he's going to be an enormous threat on the other side of the table if he turns up. As a result, he's almost certainly still going to be a whole bunch of points though. Moving on from the alpha level threats, let's talk about the rest of the demonic pantheon. And first up we have the Plaguebearers. Looks like these guys still come in 10 model units, no more, no less. Games Workshop seems to have kept the general theme of these guys from 9th edition. They've got 2 wounds and toughness 5. It does look though that they're a little bit less tanky at long range, as they only have a 5+ save there, not a 4+. Their close combat hits with 2 attacks at weapon skill 3+, strength 4, AP 1 and damage 1, and lethal hits as well, as seems to be signature for Nurgle, as we've seen with the Death Guard. Not a massive threat, but might well win a war of attrition if the enemy can't clear them. Their special rule is sticky objectives, so it remains under your control until the opponent can take it back. Definitely a nice to have for an objective securing unit normally. And it seems that the demon instruments give you a +1 to charge, quite nice out of Deep Strike I guess. And the icon gives them a leadership characteristic of 6+, a bit more immunity to battle shock there. Seems like they've kept their same character, a nice unit to stomp towards objectives and hold them despite extreme punishment, though I feel like without being able to mass up in really quite a big melee unit, they're not exactly going to be a damage dealers, and most enemy units won't worry too much about charging them unless they're lightish infantry. Next up, and maybe competing them for very tanky objective holders, we've got the Horrors. Again, they've taken the Tzeentch change where they're no longer 3+ and 6+ invuls now they're just 4+ invuls across the board. It looks like even the Blue and Brimstones get that same level of save now, pretty nice. The Pink Horrors are firing away with 2 shots hitting on a 3+, strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1. That's all being fired out at 18 inches, definitely going to chip away at a few infantry, and it's kind of nice that they retained AP -1 despite a lot of small arms losing it. Their signature rule is the split rule. They're still split into blues and then brims on a 4+ each, and that means that they can be a really quite unpredictable unit for trying to destroy off the board. Plus you might just have a little bit of positioning shenanigans as well for where you pop up with those additional horrors. I think they still look like they're going to be a monumental tar pit unit. You'll likely need to clear several times the amount of models in the squad to actually get them off an objective, though I don't think that they're going to be the most enormous damage dealers in the world. Once a bunch of pinks get removed, they both hit worse on their ballistic skill and the strength of their weapons drop. Maybe not a unit to go too crazily heavy on, but I feel like 1 or 2 to really annoy your opponent on objectives could be cool. Moving on, we've got the fast and dangerous Flesh Hounds. You still get 5 to 10 of these in the unit, and it looks like their invul saves have changed slightly for the worse as well. Only a 5+ invul save range and melee, they lost the 4+ up range. Otherwise pretty similar, 2 wounds at toughness 4 and a 12-inch move. Their gore-drenched fangs hit with 3 attacks at strength 5 AP -1, so they lost a little pip of AP there. And now they have 2 different special rules. Collars of Khorne give them a 3+ feel no pain against psychic attacks. No more messing with enemy psychic abilities though, that's gone away. And they can also heroic intervention for free now for 0 CP for a normal 2 CP stratagem. That's definitely a fun one to have. If the opponent charges a unit within 6 inches of these, you can basically pile these into combat if it makes sense. I feel like with the less AP, their damage output isn't going to be staggering. It looks like they're still going to be fairly fast nuisance units that are fairly tough with their 2 wounds. Next up for some more quality Khornate stuff. Next we have the cavalry of the Bloodcrushers. You still get these in units of between 3 and 6. They move 10 inches, and the defensive profile has been upgraded a bit. Now they're all the way up to toughness 7, so a lot more tough against small arms. They've got a 4+ invul at both range and melee, 4 wounds, and even a 4+ save, which does mean that they could actually get the benefit of cover this edition and save on a 3 from time to time. Otherwise they look fairly simple and effective. The Hellblade gives you 2 attacks with the Bloodletter Rider, that's still at strength 5, AP 2 and damage 2, so I guess that's going to be the same for the regular Bloodletter troops. I feel like the Bloodcrusher Horn is actually maybe a bit more of an important attack this time round. 4 attacks hitting on a 4, strength 6, AP -1 and damage 1, and I think this is perhaps the first place that I've seen the Lance keyword be used. That gives them +1 to wound on the charge. Putting those 2 together, they'll be fairly decent against medium infantry, not particularly exciting against vehicles and things though. To round them out a bit, as well as those 2 attacks, they also get some mortal wounds as well. Each model that actually manages to charge into an engagement range has a 4+ chance for D3 mortal wounds on the enemy. I think that's pretty solid, and in combination with the other 2, it does make them pretty general purpose. Overall seems nice enough, I feel like people probably are still going to weigh them up against Bloodletters though. It's probably going to depend on which of them can deal most damage. It still looks like you might be able to summon these guys up for deep strike charges if you need. Next up we've got the Screamers of Tzeentch. They still move impressively fast at 14 inches, toughness 4 with 3 wounds, and again they've got the new 4+ invul save. That's particularly good for them, as they're kind of likely to wind up in melee, being melee Tzeentch things. They've lost a little bit of movement, and maybe their Lamprey Bite might not be as general purpose as it was before. It's 3 attacks at strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2, but it does mean that it might be wounding a few of the tougher vehicles on a 6 now. Overall, they look like a unit that's paying a bit of a premium for their speed, but still might be worth having around due to being able to engage things quite so fast. Their Lamprey Bite for 3 of them average around about 2 dead intercessors. They're not too bad against Space Marines, and they also have that sweeping slash attack type thing from before. Each Screamer passing over one enemy unit deals a mortal wound on a 4+, might be a good way to inflict a little bit of cheeky damage here and there. Overall seem pretty similar to how they were before really. I feel like that 4+ invul in combat will help though. Next up, we've got a bit of warp fire with the Flamers of Tzeentch. These guys definitely caused problems in 9th edition for a bit. Games Workshop does seem to have reverted them a fair bit back to their previous profile though. Again, they have the more general 4+ invul save for Tzeentch now. They've lost a bit of movement down to 9 but still have fly. And their Flamer profiles I'd say are probably a bit downgraded, even though they do auto hit once more. D6 auto hits at strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1. I guess they could be strength 5 if they're near a Lord of Change. I think it is a bit of a nerf considering that they were d6 plus 3 attacks at strength 5 and AP -2 before, but I guess in the new 10th edition, entire units of flamethrowers have a bit more value all of their own. Overwatch is going to be quite a big thing, and they could roast light infantry units getting anywhere near them. The flames do have the psychic keyword as well, might mean that you just have a little bit of defense against those depending on the anti-psychic foes that you target. Their special unit rule is fall back and shoot, handy enough if the enemy engages them I suppose. They're not going to get locked in melee and be unable to do damage. As an option for leading them, we've got the Exalted Flamer. This one's the alternative guy with the big warp flames that you can build off that Screamer Chariot. He only has the option to attach to flamers, he can't be joining horrors or anything. As before, he gets the choice between either his pink or blue flames. The pink flames getting 2d6 hits at strength 5, AP -1 and damage 1, the blue giving you 3 attacks hitting on a 3+, strength 9, AP 3 and damage 3, good enough to threaten lighter vehicles. On top of that, he also gets to debuff a unit when he hits them, besides monsters and vehicles. If he hits them with either of his flames, they get -2 to move, advance and charge, though I guess he would need to be getting at least somewhat close to be able to hand out that debuff in the first place. For his actual leadership ability, he hands out the assault keyword to the unit that he leads. Means that he could have flamers with really quite a good threat range there, have 9 inches plus d6 inches, and then the 12-inch range of those flamers, that is going to get them where they need to go if they don't fancy deep striking. As ever, it's going to be very points dependent. Definitely looks fun and looks okay for on the board flamers, but he might not be worth it point for point compared with just having pure units of flamers in deep strike perhaps. Next up, we've got a couple of undivided horrors. First up with the Soul Grinder, fresh off the forge from Vashtor no doubt. He's got a fairly solid tanky profile, kind of as he had before. Lost a couple of wounds down to wounds 14, a 4+ invul at range and melee, and toughness 11 now with a 3+ save. Overall, he is going to need focused dedicated anti-tank firepower to gun him down, and even then with a 4+ invul save, he is pretty tanky. He's armed with his Harvester Cannon, which has got the new autocannon type profile at strength 10, AP -1 and damage 3. That one gets 3 shots. And then interestingly, the second ranged weapon that he gets basically depends on his god devotion. Khorne gets a great big flamer, Nurgle gets an ignore line of sight phlegm bombardment, Slaanesh gets a strength 9 damage 2 Scream of Despair, which looks quite good against intercessors, and Tzeentch gets a nice great big anti-tank warp gaze shot that's a blast keyword and d6 plus 2 damage. Honestly, just from a quick look at those, all of them look like they have their advantages. You either get a solid boost at clearing hordes, intercessors, or vehicles, or a little bit of a bombardment ignores line of sight from the Nurgle one. I could definitely be tempted by any of those, and it could be kind of interesting for the other god devotion things he's got nearby. I guess a great Unclean One could give him a feel no pain if this guy's Nurgle. Otherwise, for his second bit of war gear, he gets the choice between the Warp Claw and the Warp Sword. They're both strength 8, and the difference is that the Warp Claw gets double the attacks but only AP -1 and damage 2, whereas the Warp Sword gets better AP and damage d6. Out of the two, I think I'd rather have the double attacks, I suspect. I feel like that's probably going to average more damage against most targets, and it still doesn't have the strength to really threaten big vehicles properly. He does get that on top of a very decent anti-tank profile already, 5 attacks at strength 16, AP 3 and damage d6 plus 2, mean that he is pretty good for shredding armor when he gets close. Overall, his raw stats still seem pretty impressive. I guess he's going to be competing against greater demons though for the points spent, unless you happen to be running just a monumental army of really big tanky things. Next up, we've got the Daemon Prince of Chaos, which I must admit is a datasheet that I find really quite interesting. He seems to have lost a little bit of damage threats, but not by loads, but he's got decently tougher, gives an aura of stealth, and a once per game 3+ invul, all of which are pretty awesome things. Stats wise, on his raw defense, he's toughness 10, a 2+ save, and a 4+ invul. Really quite hard to shoot down now, and would need some dedicated firepower, though admittedly that does come with a bit of a brutal trade-off of being able to be shot directly. If you can't hide this guy behind ruins and things as he bounds up the board, he can take the brunt of enemy fire. It'll be interesting to see whether he's got the durability to make that work or not, but I certainly feel that in his favour he gives an aura of the stealth keyword, -1 to hit at range for any demon units within 6 inches, and that's a pretty massively powerful thing to be plonking in the middle of your army. If you've not got Bellicor making them entirely untargetable, this seems like the next best thing. That could be a really big chunk of your army saved from a whole ton of damage just by having this guy along. Weapons wise, he gets the new Infernal Cannon, so the ranged gun that the new model has, 3 shots at strength 5, AP 1 and damage 2. And then in combat he strikes with his Hellforged weapon. The sword and the axe have the same profile now, so you don't need to feel bad about which one you've models. 6 attacks at strength 8, AP 2 and damage 3, and interestingly enough he's also gained a sweep mode as well, 14 attacks hitting at strength 6, AP 0, damage 1, a very nice option to switch into against low save hordes. Then he's got his God Devotion, where you can pick your deity keyword. Khorne gives him extra strength, so up to strength 10 on the Hellforged there. Tzeentch makes his Infernal Cannon a bit better, basically doubles its damage output up to 6 shots. Nurgle adds 1 to his toughness, so up to toughness 11 there. Not going to be relevant against a ton of weapons, I think that. And Slaanesh I think might be the best out of any of them. You add +2 to the model's move characteristic, giving him a better chance of getting towards melee. Looks like this model only has the 8-inch move characteristic. There's nothing mentioned about wings or fly. That might be an entirely different datasheet, or could even be an option on the back. I feel like he's got a whole load of good stuff already, but on top of that he has a very nice rule called Unholy Vigour. Once per battle at the start of any phase you can use this ability. Until the end of the phase this model gets a 3+ invul save. I think that's fairly mad. A 3+ invul is a massive power to be able to have. Even if it's just for one phase, you can pick the phase that's going to be most important, one that you think your opponent might try to gun them off the board. If you really wanted to go the whole hog, you could combine that with the reroll 1s to save. That 1 command point reroll 1 stratagem is so much better on a 3+ compared with a 4+. It's effectively a 50% durability increase, even above the boosted durability of the 3+ invul. It's pretty great. Basically popping the 3+ invul and the reroll save stratagem means that you've got a ridiculously tanky Daemon Prince when you need one. Overall, I do quite like the datasheet. I really like the stealth, the invul, and the boosted save. I guess points will tell though whether he's really going to be tough enough for the cost to be on the front lines and directly shootable. Finally, we've just got a few more HQ choices, a Slaanesh Chariot and a few Nurgle Heralds. The Slaanesh Herald on the Chariot is the Tormentbringer on Seeked Chariots. Really quite a fun mixed profile this one. A 14-inch move to get where it needs to go. Surprisingly tough for a fairly flimsy Chariot at toughness 6, 12 wounds and a 4+ invul save, though I guess small armors will be strong enough to take effect against it. Its damage output is very infantry focused. It absolutely blends infantry, both with a bit of shooting with the Lashes of Torment, and then attacks in combat with a massive amount of strength 4 attacks, 8 attacks from the Seekers themselves that have lethal hits, and then 15 attacks hitting on 3s with the Ravaging Claws of the Demonettes themselves. They've got strength 4, AP -1 and devastating wounds. You're likely to get at least a mortal wound or 2 out of that. It also gives you a sustained hits 1 aura, so that means that it will be buffing its own damage that way as well for yet more hits. And the psychic ability that you get from the Tormentbringer herself, you get a Fights on Death on 4+ for 1 cycle within 6 inches. You choose that in the fight phase, and I guess unless you just happen to be coordinating with another Slaanesh Psyker, then I guess you'd choose this one. It just means that if the enemy does kill you in combat before you get to strike, you've got a 50-50 chance of still getting your attacks. Again, very points dependent. If it's cheap enough, could just be a nice nuisance unit, roll around being surprisingly tanky with a 4+ invul save, and just butcher any infantry that gets in its way. I do kind of wonder whether the special rules might wind up making it a bit more expensive than it really needs to be though, and maybe the regular Seekers or Hellflayers will be the way to go. Finally, we've got a couple of Nurgle Heralds and 1 Kairos Fateweaver. The Sloppity Piper is the Musician Herald, playing those jolly gut pipes of his. Doesn't really add much in terms of melee damage, but does provide some cheerleading. This means that the Plaguebearers that he joins get +1 to their move characteristic, and he gets to reroll advanced rolls made for them. Could propel them to a fairly long charge, I suppose, if you combined it with that stratagem. Otherwise, in combat, he's got an ability where opponents have to test Battle Shock in the fight phase. It might counter the opponent using their Interrupt stratagem, I suppose. A bit of extra Battle Shock is no bad thing to have. Overall, though, I just can't really see this guy being particularly good unless he is absolutely ridiculously cheap. Plaguebearers just don't seem to be the sort of unit that are going to attract buffing characters to do this sort of thing on the front line. I feel like you're much better going to be keeping them cheap and then just putting any save points towards more Plaguebearers or something else. The other Nurgle Herald that we've seen is the Spoilpox Scrivener. Again, he can only lead the actual Plaguebearer unit. Doesn't look like he can lead Plague Drones or anything like that, as he's not on a great big fly. I think this guy's probably the more interesting out of the two Heralds that we've seen so far. He actually lends a bit of a hand in melee with a Strength 5 attack at AP -1 and 6 attacks with lethal hits. He even has a tiny ranged attack as well with a pistol called Disgusting Sneezes, where presumably that great big mouth of his just sneezes all over you for a few Strength 3 attacks. Otherwise, his main damage boost is giving you Sustained Hits 1 for your Plaguebearers. It is quite nice, but it does mean that won't stack with lethal hits at all. I guess not bad to have a few more Strength 4 hits on your foe though. He also gives you +1 objective control for taking those midfield points. Again, unless he's very cheap, I suspect that people won't be doubling down on more value for their Plaguebearers. Still though, I think he's more tempting than the Sloppity Bilepiper for a unit heading towards the middle of the board. More objective control is pretty useful. Plus he actually adds some melee and amps up the Plaguebearers melee meaningfully. It will mean that they're a bit more of a threat than they'd be otherwise. Finally, last but by no means least, we have Kairos Fateweaver himself. He's a bit of a twist on the standard Lord of Change, swapping out Bolt of Change for Infernal Gateway, a slightly boosted focused Witchfire. Infernal Gateway's got 24 inches, so it's a bit longer range, doesn't get quite as many attacks at base, D3 +6, but not really all that much less. What it does get though is Strength 9, AP -3 and Damage D3, and while it can't flex into lethal hits or sustained hits, this thing gets the indirect fire penalty, so you've got the potential to lob this over at an enemy unit that you can't even see, maybe one that's trying to hunker down on an objective or something. Looks very nice indeed. That's a very general purpose threatening spell for clearing a bunch of infantry. Otherwise, if you're happy to swap out the warp fire buffs plus the option for sustained hits or something on your spells, Kairos does two very interesting things for command points for yours and the enemy army. One head looks forward means that he gets to have a chance of farming a command point when you use ones to target Tzeentch demons within 6 inches of him. When you use one, roll a dice. If it's greater than the current battle round, you gain a CP. Otherwise, and potentially more disruptive for your opponent, one head looks back means that you can basically increase the cost of one stratagem all game long. After your opponent has used a stratagem, that will now cost them 1 command point extra for the entire rest of the game. And interestingly, compared with previous rules, it doesn't look like this excludes the command point reroll, so you could make life very hard for your opponent there, as that's such a powerful stratagem to have. If it really is quite as unrestricted as it looks, that's probably worth throwing at the command point reroll the first time that the opponent uses it. Could be really nice for something like Overwatch though, or another powerful faction specific stratagem as well. Overall seems pretty massive to me. I think if I had the direct choice, I'd probably take Kairos Fateweaver over the regular Lord of Change if they cost the exact same points. As with the rest of these previews, really looking forward to actually being able to weigh them up when we get the points values. So anyway, that's really quite a lot of demonic goodness there. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Which are the units that you're most excited to put on the board and manifest into reality, and which are the ones that you think that aren't looking quite so hot in 10th edition as they were before. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, including new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the news and updates on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.